this Putin-Trump summit. It's one of the summits of all time. That's for sure. And well, it should be something. But really, what we are going to be doing, obviously, drop your questions in chat. We're going to be talking about it. And oh, okay, cool. All right. So, wow, they are already talking it up. So let's pop into C-SPAN. Let's see what they have to say.
Mr. Putin, will you agree to a ceasefire? Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
Let's see. Wow. Okay, that was pretty chaotic.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
Mr. Putin, will you agree to a ceasefire?
Okay, so this is crazy for a bunch of reasons. First off, so we're watching this C-SPAN stream, and obviously this is pretty messy. But what I want to point a few things out. First off, you've got Putin, Trump here. You've got Sergei Lavrov. I believe this is Kirill Dmitriev, which is sort of like Putin's semi-official ambassador to the Trump administration. This is somebody who's been close to Trump administration officials since 2016. Marco Rubio. You have Steve Witkoff, and then you have what looks like maybe a translator.
Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
Thank you, press. Let's go. Come on, guys. Thank you, press.
Mr. President Putin, why should President Trump trust your word now?
Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
We've got to go.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
Thank you, press.
Yeah, of course they're kicking out the C-SPAN cameras. By the way, bear in mind, C-SPAN is like almost an official government service. That's why we're watching it, because it's licensed, or it has no license. It's government funded, and it's like one of those things that's sort of a right. Right? They want to make sure that you can see what's happening. So, interesting. So that was it. That was just the clip that initially dropped here. But what's fascinating is that it's not clear what happened. Why did they just cut out the why did they cut out the feed? Yeah, it's just a single 40-second clip of them kicking out C-SPAN. So interesting. Is this like a clip? Why would they just suddenly go ahead and nuke? Let's see. There is a live feed purportedly.
When President Trump
Here we
was
go.
in Moscow back then, I didn't even know that he was in Moscow. I treat President Trump with utmost respect. But back then, when he was a...
This is okay. Okay, pause a minute. This is not what's going on. This is pretty disingenuous. This is the Helsinki summit, the last time they met in 2018, which was seen as extremely controversial. For a bunch of reasons, but you can see here now they've got this live Anchorage, Alaska. So currently nothing's happening. So we're gonna switch this over to the small monitor. I'm gonna turn this off because again, that's the 2018 meeting. So yeah, this is right now. Again, they are meeting behind closed doors, hopefully with their advisors. It appears. But what I think is critical to understand is to put some things in context here, right? And there's some really, really, to me, important context that is that you guys have to have going into this, right? And a lot of this has to do with Russian talking points, right? And there's a couple of claims that Russia has made that I think is like worth discussing, right? So let's see if I can find a Wikipedia article. Right, Russian claim, Ukraine war. Let's see if we find a Wikipedia. Okay, so there's a whole bunch here. Russo-Ukrainian war. This is probably as good as we're gonna get. And the Russians have maintained, so the Russians have had a bunch of sort of weird, random, I've had a bunch of weird, like random excuses for the war that have kind of morphed over time. Remember, early in the invasion, one of Putin's claims was that, we're just going to keep this up. One of Putin's claims was that there were biolabs in Ukraine. Remember, obviously that was just made up. There were claims that he was surrounded by NATO. There was all of these claims. But one that I think is his most credible is, again, in July 2021, Putin published an essay called The Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians, which he called Ukraine historically Russian lands, claimed there was no historic basis for the idea of Ukrainian people as a nation separate from the Russians. So, and that Ukraine never had real statehood, okay? And that the creation of modern Ukraine was a mistake. Now, the key thing is that the Ukrainians themselves don't agree. They, in Ukrainian history, they are of the position that Russia was an occupying force, that in the 1930s, at Russia's direction, a genocide was perpetrated on Ukraine by Russians. And so this is a history that this is like almost ghoulish. This would be seen as almost like Germany saying, like a German leader being like, Israel shouldn't exist. The Jews and Germans are one people, and it's right and proper that that Jews are under German dominion, right? That's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are so worked up about this. But the interesting part is, again, you see here in December 2021, just a few, less than 90 days before the invasion, Russia gives NATO an ultimatum. It says end activity in its Eastern European member states, right? So basically demand that NATO withdraw from the Baltics, and then ban Ukraine or any former Soviet state from ever joining the alliance, which is essentially one, Putin trying to dominate both NATO, but also trying to assert this idea of an irredentist claim. And this is the idea that the Russia is the right and proper dominating power of the former Soviet Union. And this has never really been this is something that the Russians have explicitly and implicitly been trying to evoke, and we can see it here. In fact, they're still trying to evoke it. This is the arrival of Sergei Lavrov to this meeting, and as you can see here in this clip, right, he arrives. He has a sweater vest. A vest over a sweater, but the sweater reads CCCP, which is, of course, the Cyrillic USSR. And so, again, why would he not have a shirt that says the name of his country, the Russian Federation? Right there should tell you that there's a message. And bear in mind, this message is not, it's maybe like 5% for the Russian domestic audience, but Putin has a pretty strong control over Russian domestic policymaking and media. And honestly, the American media landscape is so fragmented that anything that goes badly for Trump will never reach the ears of Trump voters because their media consumption is so siloed and algorithmically driven. The audience is the international community in general, and particularly those states where Russia wants to attempt to exert and draw into its sphere of influence, right? So this is part of that effort. And this is part of an effort to communicate to these countries that, listen, we believe we are the successors to the Soviet Union. We believe that's something we are entitled to be. And we are also sending a message that says, listen, the United States is going to treat us as such. They are going to defer to us just like they deferred to the Soviet Union and allowed it to dominate behind the Iron Curtain. that's the sort of relationship we want to have again. And so this idea that says, listen, we want every former Soviet state to become a satellite of ours is a central theme that I think you're going to see Putin try to sort of exert. And what I want to point out is that a lot of people say, oh, NATO, you're so expansionist. You're so expansionist. And here's what I want to show you guys on a nice little map here. And this is a list of member states, right? But actually, there's a nice little GIF here. Let's see if I can find it. This is a GIF of all the NATO so-called enlargement, okay? And this is important because what I want you guys to look for on this very poorly framed GIF is observe in 2004, tell me the last time before the invasion of Ukraine that NATO moved closer to Russia, okay? So notice here's Russia. So you can see, right, these countries become independent. And in 2004, you have the admission of the Baltics. But after the Baltics, that was, by the way, 22 years ago, that was the last time NATO grew closer to the Russian border. And I think that is pretty significant, right? This 2019 and 2017 countries were all of these relatively newly independent Balkan countries. These are not really, they were never Soviet countries. They're actually closer to Italy than they are to Russia. This is just seen as not really an affront to, this is not part of this Putin conspiracy theory of encirclement, okay? So what you should ask yourself, people who say, oh, NATO had encircled Russia. Well, the question then is why, other than the Baltics in 2004, why did this become such a crisis for Putin that he turned around and invaded Ukraine, a country that was not moving, not in imminent risk of becoming a NATO member, a mere 20 years after the last time NATO got closer to Russian borders. So, again, the fact that, well, why are these Eastern European countries in such a big hurry to join NATO? It's probably because they have correctly diagnosed that their neighbor Russia wants to take them over again. And if you want to see some evidence, some hard evidence of why they're so worked up about this, here's the life expectancy of former Soviet countries. And as you can see, at the time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, right, there was a pretty scary decline in life expectancy, as there was in almost every post-Soviet country, including Russia. And you can see that since then, these countries have experienced a steady, consistent rise in their life expectancy. In fact, the only country that has really remained sort of depressed in terms of overall life expectancy has been, in fact, Russia. And if you look at some of the countries that have pivoted towards NATO. You see Estonia, one of the largest gains in life expectancy, notably because they're a NATO member, right? They sort of made this pivot towards NATO. Latvia, Lithuania, you can see these countries at the top of the chart who have had the most gains in life expectancy, and a chart for GDP is going to show you almost the exact same thing. These are countries that have benefited so tremendously from integration with the West. So let's see if we can do GDP over time in Estonia, right? That's a good classic Baltic state, okay? So Estonia's GDP, let's see if we can find a nice macro trends chart. Here we go. Yeah, so you can see here, right? 94, 4 billion. Estonia is now a $40 billion GDP country. So it's a no-brainer. There probably were no stats, obviously, when it was a Soviet country, right? GDP probably wasn't seen as a worth tracking. But these kind of huge gains are something that is emblematic of what happened to these countries. So not only did they get their political and military independence, right, from Russia and avoided that domination, but they they got to the protection from their aggressive neighbor, but they enjoyed tremendous economic gains, right? And let's contrast this with a country that remained under the Russian sort of domination, right? This is Belarus. We'll do GDP over time for Belarus. This is a country that is deeply locked in. You can see it going from 20 billion to 75 billion. So you're looking at, again, a GDP actually at the dissolution of in the 90s, it was about 18, right? It actually peaked, believe it or not, peaked in 2014 at about 80 billion. So Estonia had a 10x increase. Belarus experiencing not quite, what's that? A 4 times increase, like a 3.5-fold increase. So underperforming its neighbors by a substantial margin. Right. And if we want to try to, let's see if we can try to find. Yeah, here we go. Here's a GDP per capita chart, which is even more sort of stunning, right? You can see Russia, and if you're a dominant colonial power, you're pretty extractive from your neighbors, right? So you can see Russia's GDP obviously increasing substantially. Belarus's GDP per capita basically hasn't increased in 10 years. And in fact, it only increased slightly from 2008 to today. Let's see if we can contrast this with old Estonia. Again, a Baltic that pivoted in a different direction. You can see just massive increases along with its Baltic allies, Lithuania and Latvia. You can see it's not even close, right? In 2008, right, or in 2014, right, here's the peak of the Baltics, or here's the peak of Belarus's GDP per capita. You can see since then, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania experiencing like well over a doubling. So what you're seeing here is clear that if you are the government of these countries and you want to ensure long, prosperous lives for your people, a look to the West is the superior offer, right? It's not hard to figure that one out. And so I think, but to Vladimir Putin, right, who has, again, an imperialist, or what's called an irredentist view of the world, which is sort of like Putin and Peter the Great would agree on a lot of the way things should be run. In fact, Putin and medieval kings would agree on the way things ought to be, which is my country is enriched not through technology, not through economic development, not through strategic investment, but through the acquisition of more lands and peoples. And the more productive the land and the more populous the people, the better off you're going to be, right? So that sort of perspective is obviously a threat to their neighbors, right? But also it's a deterrent. It deters other countries from wanting to be your ally. And that's sort of the secret sauce of the West, right? Is to say, hey, you join the West, yeah, you're going to be part of a military alliance. Yeah, you're going to have a bunch of allies who are going to shore up your democratic system. But also, you're going to engage in this free trade, and it's going to be immensely prosperous. Your whole country is going to get richer. Your people are going to live longer. It's a objectively better system. Ryan Hess, thanks for the 20. Keep it up. Good work. Yeah. So, and by the way, just to pop back over here, guys, they're still just playing highlights from previous meetings. You can see here the screen and the screen. Again, as soon as something happens, I'm gonna obviously, I'm gonna absolutely bring it up, and we're gonna listen in. But what's also worth noting, as they point out here, is there's a lot of this discussion about Ukrainian neutrality, but Ukraine was not a NATO country when Putin invaded in 2014. In fact, it said it was not seeking NATO membership, and Ukraine only began to seek NATO membership because Russia had occupied Crimea and the Donbas. In fact, Ukraine's parliament voted in 2014 to revoke the neutral status and seek membership in NATO. And so when Putin goes and demands neutrality, Ukraine is like, well, obviously the last time that happened, we were neutral. You carved off more of our country because you forced us to admit that you had forced us to prevent going to an alliance. And as they point out here, the fact that the West never really responded meaningfully to Russia's annexation of Crimea and the Donbas led Putin to believe that the West would also kind of roll over and let him take Ukraine. This is also what's not included here is Putin's 2008 invasion of Georgia, in which he also did the exact same thing. He's also exercised these kind of Donbas-style independent breakaway regions like Transnistria in Moldova. And this breakaway region is, again, recognized only by Russia. But to Russia, it's a whole other country that they carved off from Moldova. Thank you, Readiness. I appreciate it. So, again, I think we're going to hear a lot of Russian talking points repeated probably by Putin, very likely by Russia, by Putin, probably by Trump as well. And the fact is that you can see Russia is already engaged in this kind of behavior where they've said, oh, well, we're going to declare these occupied regions as our own. And you have to ask yourself, if they're trying to sort of create their own breakaway republic, and then, by the way, they held sham referenda to actually declare all of these regions part of Russia, a lot of their other claims about what they want doesn't really hold water, right? Because if your goal is simply to deter NATO or whatever, or why would you need to, if you want Ukraine to, say, be a neutral country or something like that, why would you need to annex their territory? Wouldn't you just need to like take territory, defeat their military? Shadow Guy, thank you from Switzerland. Appreciate the voice of reason in this times. Even here, people are starting to worry. Yeah, I definitely agree. There are many causes for worry, particularly because it seems like the U.S. president himself doesn't really have a firm, fixed strategy going into this, right? And he was asked explicitly, like, what are you looking for from Putin? And the answer was essentially, I don't know. It was a listening session 2 days ago. Yesterday, Trump said he was going to make a deal, but it wasn't clear over what that deal would be. And what's important to note is that Trump initially went to Putin. One, they have had several phone calls. And so it's just like the joke, this meeting should have been an email. This meeting could have been a phone call, right? So how did we go from unproductive phone calls, the President Trump saying, listen, we need Putin to be more concrete, to give us some kind of good faith action. He loves talk, but he never takes action. How do we go from that, Trump, to suddenly Putin saying, you're going to leave the White House, you're going to come meet me in Alaska, and we're going to have the same unproductive phone calls that we've had just in person. So this is the ultimate meeting that should have been an email. Okay, Windbreaker asks, shouldn't Putin and his team be arrested in Alaska? No, because the U.S. is not a party to the International Criminal Court. And part of that is actually for good reason. It's because the United States, because we are the military guarantor of the entire free world, we have a policy that says that wherever American troops operate, we maintain the right to self-defense. And the ICC, and we're subject to our own military law called the UCMJ, and we therefore cannot allow a foreign court legally to try U.S. service members for performing their duties as authorized. right? So imagine, for example, you're in U.S. Navy ship, which guarantees freedom of the seas, and you engage a pirate vessel, and afterward you realize, oh my gosh, that pirate vessel, it was a mistaken identity, or there was civilians on board and they were killed, and the ICC goes, great, present those sailors to The Hague, we're going to try them. Well, the U.S. would go, no. They're subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. They're not subject to a third national set of criminal code. And so the U.S. has, I think, correctly been like, listen, we don't allow a transnational system of law to trump the U.S. law. It literally can't happen. The U.S. Constitution forbids it. It would also like run into some equal protection under the law issues. So the U.S. has correctly not signed on to the ICC. And even if we did, we would be unlikely to arrest Putin because if you're Vladimir Putin, like if the U.S. invites you to your country and then arrests you, future world leaders like will never come to the United States because there is an implication of diplomats traveling in good faith, right? Just like, technically Russia and Ukraine are at war. So Russia and Ukraine, when their diplomatic envoys saw each other, they technically should have tried to shoot each other and kill each other, right? They're nations at war. And they didn't, though, because there's this de facto recognition that says, hey, diplomatic missions at all levels get a sort of pass. Because otherwise, how can you find diplomatic solutions to conflicts without having the sides able to meet each other? Yeah. So everybody in chat, listen, I'm gonna break some hearts. Let's talk about international law. There is no international law. Okay. There isn't an international court. There's never going to be a warrant. I'm sorry. People are like, oh, there's a warrant for their arrest in the ICC. It's not true. There is warrants in individual countries, but there is no international law. You cannot flee the international court. There are international agreements, and sometimes there is like an international like dispute resolution body, but guess what? When that dispute resolution body resolves an issue that a country doesn't like, and this happened with Venezuela over offshore oil drilling, they go, no, you're not. You're not right. That's wrong. So, again, that's, I think the thing to bear in mind is that yeah, there is no transnational law. There are agreements, right, between countries, but those agreements can be rolled back at any time by any party. They say, oh, there is an international court. The international court is mostly performative. And again, it's ignored by countries that want to, right? The international court can issue all the arrest warrants it wants, but unless those people are brought into a country whose law says the international court has law enforcement powers within our country, it doesn't matter. Right, exactly. There's treaties. Treaties govern countries. And there's a treaty that says, hey, we're going to build this international court and it'll it'll be a valid court in these couple of countries. Yes, Arn, thank you. Compare this to the ambush Zelensky got. It's beyond embarrassing for the U.S. and a stain on the character of the U.S. outwardly speaking. Yeah, it's pretty clear that Trump's general policy has been to praise, honor, and flatter autocrats, enemies of the United States, and except for China. He remains a very hostile to China. And to denigrate and humiliate the U.S.'s allies. So, it's hard. It's hard to sit there and be like, okay, but what's more troubling is the reality of seeing, like future allies are going to be deterred from collaborating from the United States because they know that the U.S. doesn't honor its agreement. And thanks, Evo. Appreciate it. Enjoying the channel for some time already. Cool. Awesome. So, and this is kind of actually, this is a good segue. So international law, it doesn't exist, right? If the U.S. chooses, let's say NATO countries go, listen, you signed this NATO treaty. Article 5 says you have to defend us, and Russian drones are rolling into Estonia. You have to defend us. We're calling Article 5. And the U.S. goes, sorry, guys, not feeling it today. Not going to happen. Who's going to stop them, right? Like if I say, hey, I'm going to rob your house, right? Somebody goes, no, you're not. That's my house. I'm going to call the cops, right? The cops will show up. They'll arrest me. Like someone will stop me, presumably. And whether I want to or not, a cop will arrest me. I will be put in pretrial confinement. I will be charged. I will be tried. I will be sentenced, right? That is not how violating international treaties works. There is the only real final enforcement mechanism is the credibility of the signer, is the strength and credibility of the person who signed that treaty. And this is one of the problems with Trump in general, is that you don't realize that a treaty isn't just a piece of paper. It's more like a handshake agreement. Every treaty is a handshake agreement between friends. And the more you can trust your friend, the more credible the treaties are. This is one of the fundamental problems with Putin, is that there were at least 3 different Minsk Accords that he signed that were supposed to be ceasefire agreements in the Crimea Donbas conflict in 2014. And those were backed by the European powers. The European powers said, Ukraine, sign these. We're sure. We have real consequences. Russia is pinky promising that they're going to comply with this ceasefire. And Putin, within literally weeks, the ceasefire fell apart. And so the issue that we have is that when the United States says, we're your friend, we have your back, we are security guarantors, we are NATO members, it's more than just going over the treaty with like a red pen and being like, technically you have to help us here. The rule is always, technically we don't have to do anything. The treaty just spells out the relationship that we have with you. But just like a friendship, right? You don't have an agreement of friendship. You may sit there and say, hey, man, I need you to watch my dog and water my plants while I'm out of town this weekend. And I'll bring you back a 6-pack of beer and I'll order you dinner, right? I'll have you DoorDash deliver you some dinner, right? That's like a treaty, but that's not the scope of the relationship. The scope of the relationship would also say things like, hey, if your neighbor hops your fence and sees, damn, he left his hose running, he's going to turn it off. And so that, I think, is one of the takeaways here, is that the credibility of a friendship, the credibility of an international relationship, is a function of all the times you've done what you said you were going to do and you honored the spirit of the agreements. And so sometimes countries don't honor their agreements, and you go, just like sometimes friends do things where you go, oh man, I really wish you would have done X. But you look at the whole friendship and you say, okay, this is generally a trustworthy person. But at some point, when you roll back enough of these agreements, when you roll back enough of these treaties, when you start to find reasons to not agree to do any of the things you said you would do, at some point, your friends are going to go, hey man, I just don't think this is a trustworthy person. I don't think this is a friendship that I can continue to invest resources in, because I don't think I can trust this person to do what they say they're going to do. And that's ultimately one of the problems, is that NATO isn't just a piece of paper. It's just like the Constitution isn't just a piece of paper. It's a set of principles. It's a set of ideals that say, listen, we share these common values with each other. We share these common objectives: a free world, countries that get to represent, countries whose governments are represented by the people, free market economies, right? And so we promise to look out for each other. And every time you row in the opposite direction, you discredit the country. Kerr makes Kerr, that's a great point, right? He says technically Article 5 is fulfilled, and he's joking. He says if Trump sends a signed copy of Art of the Deal to an attacked country, right? But it's true, right? Article 5 does not specify how much support you have to give to your friends. So if Estonia is attacked, if Russian paratroopers drop into Estonia, technically the U.S. would be in compliance with Article 5 if it issues a strongly worded letter. Now, almost every European country is going to look around and be like, yo, that's not support, right? The U.S. support means something. And again, the more you play these games where you sign a treaty and you roll back a treaty, right? Greg Stevens says, war needs to end, but business deals are never the way to negotiate with terrorists. Just look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Many more may have died if Trump handled the disaster failure he started. Yeah, exactly. And again, like, absolutely wars can end with a financial element to them. No doubt about it. Oftentimes those financial elements are bad, but you can't, as we point out, the person who doesn't need further coercing to sign a ceasefire is Ukraine. Ukraine's stance, and it has been for months, is ceasefire today. We will conduct a ceasefire today, and we'll freeze the line of contact, and then Russia and Ukraine, we're going to sit down and we're going to hash out our issues with international mediation. And maybe we'll resolve them in 6 weeks. Maybe we'll resolve them in 6 years. But they say, let's stop the fighting today. That's been Ukraine's stance for months. So then you got to ask yourself, okay, great. You've gotten Ukraine there. So who needs additional coercion to get there? Who has not conceded anything? Whose war aims have expanded, become even more aggressive? Vladimir Putin's. And so it's very simple. Vladimir Putin, just like anyone else, just like a toddler, it's about incentives, right? You can't negotiate. You can't charm your way to getting a country to change its stance, right? You have to coerce them. You have to make them reach the conclusion that this ceasefire today is superior, is the best position you're going to have. It's superior to all the other positions, superior to continued fighting, right? And so that may be like, hey, yeah, you signed this ceasefire, and as long as it's sustained, we have a graduated lifting of sanctions, right? You maintain a 60-day ceasefire, and an initial tranche of sanctions get lifted, whatever it is. But you have to understand what's called realism. It's a very, very common school of thought. And realism simply holds that countries are always looking at the realities in front of them and how much power they have in a situation. And again, it's like you get what you incentivize, right? No different than prisoners in a prison, right? U.S. prison, you say, listen, if you engage in good behavior, you don't fight, you don't steal, you don't get in trouble, you get to move to minimum security, you get more freedoms, you get an extra bag of ramen or whatever. Like, it's very simple, but it works for almost all human beings. All right. Geir Jorgensen says, if the United States, a NATO member, were to invade Greenland, which is part of Denmark and also within NATO, how would the alliance respond? Would such an act trigger Article 5 or create an internal crisis when Article 1 takes precedence? Okay, so let me let's see. So I think, again, Article 1 saying, hey, NATO countries should settle disputes through peaceful means. I think that's a statement of like aspiration. What's worth noting is like Turkey is a NATO member, but Turkish forces actually worked at times with members of ISIS against Kurdish forces who were working with U.S. special forces. So for moments, at times, Turkish forces may have engaged NATO-backed or even potentially NATO forces. Or sorry, they're all NATO forces. U.S. special forces in like the Syria region. So the NATO's rule is usually, hey, of course, member states are going to have internal tiffs. Of course, there's going to be disputes. They could be economic disputes. They could be like extra, again, like a Syria issue where countries have different incentives. But I think I don't think it would. I mean, it would be an internal crisis within NATO because that would be on another level. But the general set of principles at work would be that countries in a state of conflict, NATO stays out of it. NATO stays out of the boxing match. Now, what you're describing would be a fundamental reshaping of like the U.S. relationship to the world, like the U.S. becoming like a conquering power, not a country that says, hey, we have this preferred faction in Syria and our special forces are kind of helping them, and Turkey going, well, we want to see this preferred faction and we're kind of backing them a little bit. Like that is so small in scale relative to these countries that that's why like little tiffs, little areas where interests don't align perfectly are something that is routine and accepted with NATO, and NATO's rule is just like let them settle it. Okay, Tho Betten. I got my first engineer paycheck and caught the stream. Been watching the channel through college. Nice. Congrats on getting through college and getting your big boy engineer job. Thanks for keeping us updated on what's going on in Ukraine and over there in the U.S. Keep up the good work. Right. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. Great to have you as a longtime fan. Rodramex. Russia gets EU, China gets South Asia, U.S. gets America. Yeah, this is funny. Right? I mean, it's funny, but that is exactly how great powers in, say, the 1780s would have looked at the world. It was called spheres of influence, and it was this idea that says, listen, if you're one of the great powers, you get to dominate lesser powers within a certain kind of carve up. But that resulted in what, it's funny, some historians actually call the in the U.S. we call it the French Indian War, but it's like the 50th English-French War, right? But the point is that the French and English fought, I think it was like the 1670s, something like that. The French and English fought all over the world. In literally every continent, they were fighting each other on the seas. Again, in the U.S., it was considered the French Indian War because, well, there were French, there were Indians, right? It was the Syria of its day. But that was a world in conflict, in constant conflict. That was a world that was hyper militarized. Countries were spending huge sums of money on their militaries as a share of their GDP. It's not a way to look about the world. Now, obviously, what you pointed out, like this is obviously a parody of, but it's not far off from the way these countries look at the world. Martin Wigg, thanks. Taco Trump. And this is the other thing that I think is important, is that Trump himself also is benefiting from this summit, even though it's a performance, even though it's a nothing burger. And again, it still looks like really nothing's happening. People are kind of mulling around here. I'll show you guys. So you can see they're still just playing old clips. This is from February when they get in their shouting match. And you can see here they're just sort of setting up the podium and stuff. But again, I'm watching it. We'll weigh in as we see stuff. And so I think another thing that's like, let's see. Sorry, I was in the middle of a point and I saw people. Oh, yeah, the Taco Trump thing. Okay, so if you're Trump, you've got to understand, he also has some benefits from this. Now, the chances of this going anywhere are basically like nil, right? Because as we've discussed, Putin doesn't really want to Putin has no intention of ending the war. He's not behaving like someone who intends to end the war. You just need to pull up the Ukraine live map and be like, okay, does this look like the map of of a country who is really serious about peace? Like, do you think that, dozens and dozens and dozens of assaults across the front line, Shahed drones hitting Donetsk, at least, right, just 2 hours ago? Do you think any of that is a sign of someone who's like committed to a sincere, productive, peaceful resolution? No, of course not. Of course not. But Trump stands to benefit from this in a couple of ways. First off, you notice how, even though this is a waste of time, as we've discussed, right? Trump, this is the ultimate meeting that should have been an email, because Trump spoke to Putin 4 or 5 times. Putin has said whatever Trump wants to hear and then continues to bomb. Steve Witkoff went to Putin and claimed that Putin told him that he was totally willing to withdraw from some regions, that there was a territory for territory move to be done. And immediately the Russian government was like, no, we never said that. This is absolutely false. And so, Putin has conceded nothing. Whatever they discussed could absolutely have been discussed as a phone call. So then why is it important that Putin do this? It's a performance for him to demonstrate his ability to concede nothing and get the U.S. president to kind of bark and roll over. But for Trump, it's also really important because look at us, right? Despite the fact that everyone in this chat knows that nothing is coming from this. This is a performance. This is a big to-do. Still, despite fully being aware of this, we are still tuning in. We are still tuning in for this thing. And I think, to me, that's a key part of it, is that not only does Trump love the spectacle, right? One of the Trumpy stances is people are now saying, well, this is the best chance for peace. It's like, there's no chance for peace. There's none. Putin doesn't intend on it. One, because one of the combatants isn't here. So no matter what Trump says, Ukraine's not going to roll over. The Europeans, right, who, by the way, Trump just a few weeks ago said, oh, our agreement is that Europeans will buy the weapons and give them to Ukraine, which implies that he's saying, listen, this is a European war, a European funded conflict. I'm just kind of the guy selling you stuff, which is fine. If that's your stance, then say, hey, Putin, don't meet with me. Meet with reps from the EU. Meet with the Ukrainians and the EU reps. We're just helping out our friends by selling them some stuff. So Trump's larger goal with this production is to, soak in eyes, get attention, because attention is something he needs on like a really fundamental level. But more important than that, he's distracting from what has proven to be one of his worst issues, which is the Epstein files, right? Something he promised to release. For those of you not in the U.S., Jeffrey Epstein was a prolific sex trafficker and sexual abuser of young women, minor girls, and Epstein was also had some kind of strange wealth management business that put him in touch with some of the most powerful people in the entire United States. And so you can imagine how bad it looks, when you have this incredibly wealthy guy who is always flying around on his jet with people like the president or like the former Treasury Secretary, or very, very frequently the current president, Donald Trump. And then there's literally thousands of girls who are like, we've been systematically trafficked and sold by this guy. And numerous statements by those trafficked girls have said that, hey, I was personally abused by this famous person, that famous person. And so one of the things the U.S. public has said is like, listen, we need to know if our leaders were a part of this. We're abusing these girls. We're a part of this network. And that was something Trump ran on. He said, I'll release these files. I'll release everything we know so that the U.S. public can decide who their leadership really is. And there are innumerable documents linking photographs, sworn statements by victims who said I was sexually abused by President Trump, written correspondence between Trump and Epstein, Trump's current, or not now, he's on Air Force One, but when he was Citizen Trump, he flew on Jeffrey Epstein's former plane. described Jeffrey Epstein as his best friend, said that he loves young girls as Trump does. Trump was like, Jeffrey Epstein loves young girls, so do I. All of these things, right? To me, as we've talked about, you don't need, like, what more evidence do you want exactly for this? But the U.S. public has said, listen, we want to see everything. We want to know who was a part of this network. And the president has refused to do that. He said, we're going to release this thing, we're going to release that thing. But ultimately, what's wanted is the U.S. has said, listen, we need to know who the clients of this person were. And was it you? Was it you, the president? And the president has said so much weird stuff. It's maybe the worst lying anyone's ever seen by a public official, because he said, there is no Epstein list. Then he said, well, there is a list, but I'm not on it. The next day he said, well, there is a list and I am on it, but my name was put there by Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, which is crazy because Bill Clinton is also almost certainly on the list. So the Bill Clinton energy of just being like, I'm going to reach back from outside the presidency, create the Epstein files, then charge Epstein under Trump administration, and then add my own name to the list. Like, make sure you put me in there a bunch. Like, okay, dude. So it's preposterous. It's fairly obvious his name is all over it. Again, but he needs to distract the public from it. And spectacle is his best and in some ways only tool. That's why he's done a lot of things that are spectacles without any real substance, right? That's why there's a lot of like seething and coping about like, oh, Trump deployed the National Guard to DC. Listen, the National Guard gets deployed to DC whenever it snows. They have not been granted magic arrest authority. They are not shooting protesters. They are a bunch of overweight 20-somethings doing fuck all because they don't have any authority, right? And this is part of the performance. And this is part of the performance. So Putin knows he's doing a favor in some ways. Obviously he's not doing Trump a favor. He is benefiting tremendously from this by showing to the world that he can make the US president, bark and roll over and he doesn't have to do anything in exchange for it. But also Trump is benefiting in some ways from this by creating spectacle. So, okay. Acceleron. If Trump cuts off aid, how bad would that be for the Ukrainians? Well, right now, the policy is that the Europeans purchase aid for the Ukrainians. So they would probably just have to purchase it elsewhere. Ukraine has also been kind of on a campaign of self-funding, being able to build their own drones and their own ammunition. So it may not be that bad. The fear would be if Trump says, listen, I'm just revoking Russian sanctions. I'm just going to unsanction Russia. That would be bad. Greg Stevens, I don't usually catch you live. One of only 2 valid channels worth watching for war news. Sending a report and respect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let's see. And then Jonathan Lorano. How big is Trump's ego is? I imagine he would have gone all in by now, arming Ukraine after all else Putin gave him. Yeah, that was one of the things. That was actually kind of my prediction. I talked about this going into the Trump administration, where I said, I think that if I were a betting man, I would bet that Trump is going to like double down, that he's going to see Putin for who he is, that he's going to review the classified intelligence and say, man, this guy was playing me all along. But that's kind of what happened last term, right? Trump got kind of normie Republican experts around him, and they sort of like, he did some crazy shit like with Steve Bannon, but once Steve Bannon was out, like it was like closer to normal Republican stuff, other than the fact that Trump himself is like a character. The fact that he hasn't now is, and he's had no consistent policy, is pretty insane. Whiskey Echo, Putin is a war criminal. The belligerent party should get nothing. No USSR 2.0. Europe needs to take their gloves off and start prepping for war. Nice words don't deter either of them. Yeah, this is the thing. Like, Trump, obviously, there's an indictment to be made here, but Europe also bears some responsibility, because even Obama, right, in the Obama era, he was going to Europe and being like, listen, you guys, I understand 2008's tough. I understand it's been hard, but you guys need to be ready to fight your own wars. You have to be able to make your own weapons. You have to have your own militaries that are capable of actually going to the battlefield, not just fighting in your home countries, but going to a battlefield, fighting and winning. And the Europeans basically ignored him. They're like, no, we don't want to do it. That's expensive. We have our own debt crisis, like blah, 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 blah. And now they're looking around saying, shit. For example, there was an article yesterday that said that the Europeans were drafting a potential like ceasefire peacekeeper deal. And they said, they passed around the hat. They said, how many EU countries can put up some peacekeepers, right? A permanent presence. So, if you have 5,000 troops, but you rotate them every year and you honor your other military commitments and et cetera, the total number was 30,000 European troops. And again, that's not in a combat zone where there's going to be casualties. That's peacekeepers where there's effectively zero casualties. And that is a pretty disturbingly small number that the Europeans can cough up, right? For context, the U.S. basically sustained during the surge in Iraq. We surged 100,000 troops into Iraq. So at one point, I think we had 200,000 total troops deployed sustainably for like years and years and years and years. So again, the Europeans should have needed to start prepping for war probably 30 years ago. But again, they basically, when the Soviet Union fell in 91, the Europeans said, great, the U.S. is going to keep a big military. We are going to focus on developing our economy. And when we need military things done, we'll just call the United States. That's what we'll do. And that, obviously now Europe's turned around and goes, damn, we have the military production capabilities of a country from 40 plus years ago, right? We're nowhere close to where we need to be. And look no further than the fact that if you want to buy an alternative to the F-22, right, a stealth fighter that came out 20 years ago. In fact, if you want to buy an alternative to the F-117, a stealth fighter that debuted, no kidding, in the 90s, late 80s, you can't. No European defense contractor has ever solved the stealth fighter problem. There's one contractor that claims it's going to totally build a 5th generation fighter in 2040. Aceleron, thanks. Will the EU be able to buy enough supplies considering the low levels of the Ukrainian army recruitment? Possible RU breakthroughs on the front? I don't think a breakthrough is possible because a breakthrough requires exploitation, right? It's not enough to penetrate lines, right? Special forces and sabotage groups penetrate lines all the time. What you have, in fact, is a breakthrough of the, like, at most you have these penetrations by small groups, basically. And to exploit that breakthrough, you need a concentration of troops. Well, a concentration of troops can't exist on this battlefield, full stop. Because, as we talked about, 24/7 reconnaissance drones always flying, and we have the unbelievable ability, both sides, to strike concentrations with rocket artillery, HIMARS, ATACMS, or just a shitload of drones, right? It's just too hard. You cannot concentrate forces sufficiently for a breakthrough. You have to just grind things down. So unfortunately, man, I was really thinking, given that this meeting was supposed to start at 3, that I was really thinking that we'd be kind of wrapped by now. Or it's been going on for, what, 2.5 hours? I was really thinking that it would be at least there'd be some press conferences or something. Because, I mean, I got to get out of here in a half hour. And it looks as though, like, they're sort of prepping. Here, let me pull it up. I'll show you guys. So, again, C-SPAN is just replaying this February meeting. You can see people are kind of gathering around the lectern, but even the even these guys, there's not really anything happening. C-SPAN hasn't even pulled up the main screen yet, but once it does, I'm definitely gonna obviously cut straight to it. But I'm just gonna see if, like, there's any headlines from no, it just says it's underway. It just says meeting underway. Right now it's a 3-on-3 meeting. Putin and Trump rode together to the meeting site. So, okay, they were together. Rubio and Steve Wickoff joining the 3-on-3 meeting. Okay. I love how CNN was like, Putin makes confused expressions as journalists ask about Ukraine. And it's like, well, yeah, he's literally only used to getting softball questions. And I think he believed that that Trump had also sort of purged the White House press corps of anyone who was ever going to like ask a real question, you know? Yeah. So, interesting. Terran Nova makes a good point. Russian finances are in a tighter spot than they're letting on. That is for sure. There's a lot of rumors, a lot of stories that Russia is hiding its economic data, which is much grimmer than people are realizing. Putin has essentially said, I won't let the Russian economy fall into recession. And so, therefore, conveniently, Russia is reporting 0% growth, which is as low as you can report it without technically being a recession, right? Because recession requires 2 quarters of economic contraction. And so I think the takeaway, I think that the problem, as we've talked about, is that when you have this economic contraction happening, and businesses are aware of it, right? This is why timely economic data, even if it has to get revised a little bit, your best guess, as soon as you can make it, is so valuable for firms because it allows them to prepare, right? Like we said, the analogy is like your house. Imagine if you knew for certain that there were layoffs coming in your company, or imagine if you knew for sure a recession was coming. What would you do? Or you would save more money. You wouldn't invest it in high-risk vehicles. You would get a little bit of an extra cushion. You would maybe reduce your consumption. You maybe wouldn't go out to eat quite as much. You would hold off on big projects. Now, all of those actions in the short term help a recession. They help slow the economy, right? You're not spending money. You're kind of hoarding it. And by the way, Rodrimex, the con in your Asian, love it. The other thing, so you would do these actions, right, to protect your family from a recession. And then the recession comes, right? And what happens? Well, your decisions helped bring about the recession, but they also keep the recession mild at the same time. Because what are you able to do? You're able to, because you had that data, because you had that warning, you're able to make your mortgage payments. You make your car payments, right? And so you are able to do that with the extra cash you've saved. And so 18 months later, when the recession ends, maybe you get your job back, maybe you get your pay bump again. You go, oh, we made it through, right? Now, what happens if you don't have economic data? If you follow the playbook of Putin in Russia, where you hide economic data so deeply? Well, when that happens, households, sure, can't prepare, but it seems like smart Russian households kind of smell it, right? They've been through a crisis before. That's why there's suddenly a lot of cash circulating in Russia. A lot of people are pulling their cash out of banks. But also, firms, more importantly, they cannot prepare. Because recessions, right, have a lot of individual contours, right? They look at, again, look at 2008. It wasn't a recession that hit everywhere all at once. It started in housing and then sort of spread, right? And so this kind of sector-based housing, right? And the contours of the crisis looked kind of unique, right? Yeah, there was unemployment, but it wasn't all sectors. There were even some bright spot sectors. I think healthcare never really had a great recession. Military and government spending never had a great recession. All I had to do was fight in Afghanistan, and I made it through the worst economy for millennials. But I think so that's, I think, a takeaway is that you can you can kind of keep your economy on glide mode, even if it's in recession, by hiding the data. You can sort of get firms to keep spending, keep pumping into the economy. And if you can just lie for that a couple of, a month or two, a couple of quarters maybe, about the state of the economy. And if you can change course, like Putin, if he can get the sanctions lifted, that'll be enough fuel to restart the economic engines for these firms. And Russia will be able to, his economy will be able to sail off again. But the problem is that if that's not the case, then at some point he's going to have to like peel the tape off the altimeter, and the people in the plane, the Russian economy, is going to look and be like, shit, we've been in free fall for a long time, and it's a little too late. So I think that's the state of the Russian economy. I think it's significantly worse than Putin's letting on. There's a lot of evidence for that. Right? Dejected Frogcat says, we are also hiding unemployment data ourselves. That is true. That is true, guys. So yeah, we're still just replaying the like Trump Zelensky blow up. I don't really see. Let's see if I wonder if Fox News is covering this differently. I'm like, nope, basically the same thing. Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska. Again. So, but don't worry, Senator Ted Cruz is on Fox News. Just insufferable. Accelerant, thanks for your insights. What are the optics of this format for Trump with MAGA and trad conservatives versus Russia hawks? What makes it worth doing for Trump? So the optics of this format are bad for Trump. Again, you have to think that Vladimir Putin conceded nothing. Continued to aggressively pursue his war of aggression in Ukraine, and got the U.S. president to leave the White House and meet him for a peace summit. So you can infer, if nothing changed on Putin's side, then something must have changed on Trump's side. And if you are a third country observing this, what you would say is that Russia is winning because they have been pursuing the exact same policy the entire time, unbroken, and NATO has fractured. They've shifted their policy. Now the U.S. president is meeting with him and personally visiting him to hear his side, so to speak. So again, I think the optics for Trump are bad if you are a traditional conservative. For MAGA just lives in MAGA land. And we saw on Fox News, which is like the MAGA station. They viewed this as a peace summit, even though it was literally described by the White House as a listening session. Right? So, they call it a historic summit, which is true. It absolutely is. Right? And also sort of funny that it's like Trump eyes Nobel Prize after Hillary Clinton's offer for a Ukraine deal. And it's funny. Hillary Clinton said the same thing. She's like, listen, if he can get Putin to withdraw from Ukraine and, end the war, and not have to concede NATO membership. Yeah, shit. If he can do that, I'll nominate him for a peace prize. I'll put him in. I'll make a whole video. Be like, Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. If he can get Russia to withdraw from Ukraine, keep NATO membership on the table, and not have to do anything comically absurd like sell out the country of Alaska or pledge a huge portion of U.S. GDP to Russia. Yeah, I'll make a whole video. Be like, Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, and I'll lay it out. But it's not going to happen. Why? Because it's not going to happen because Vladimir Putin has taken no actions that are indicative of peace. They've only taken actions indicative of further aggression, right? So again, it says Trump, Rubio, and Steve Witkoff still meeting behind closed doors. Arn Ice says, is there not a World War II shadow of guilt and fear over military-related things in Europe? Not excusing and rich to say from Iceland without a military. Been worried for Europe since I was a kid. Yeah. So I think there's definitely some of that. Europe. For America, war is something that happens somewhere else. It's different when a war hits your own continent. But what's important to remember is Europe spent robustly on their militaries when the Russian threat was seemed more proximate, right? During the Cold War, European countries spent robustly on their militaries. And so this idea, so it's only been like 40 years that the Europeans have been like, oh, we finally don't have to do that annoying military thing. And there's a bunch of issues around that, right? I think the Europeans were like, well, I'm not really that nationalist. I don't really care. People are like, well, like the survey we talked about where 50% of Germans wouldn't defend Germany. And it's like, really? Like, you don't see that your system of representative democracy is worth it? Like, you don't think representative democracy is worth defending over, say, a Russian oligarchy? Like, the average German doesn't see their system as being like meaningfully beneficial over an oligarchy. And that's the kind of thing that I think is like more of a cultural rot. And don't get me wrong, it's happening in America. I think it's just happening later. I think 9/11 made a lot of people say, hey, what does it mean to be American? What are the core American values? How do we live those values? And that is, I think Europe never really had to ask those questions, right? It's like a fish being like, man, I'm so grateful I have water. With the European public being like, well, of course, won't a country dominated by Putin also be a representative democracy? It's like, no, that's not guaranteed. It's a free market isn't guaranteed, right? So, like, yeah. And it was like, you don't need 50% of the population to defend, though. True-ish. But it's still a troubling sign that many people don't believe their country is worth defending. Yeah. Kalozi Dask. I think there's some truth to that. A larger sort of Western, like, inability to contextualize the world that they live in. And to understand that, like, it is the like default state. If you took the median state in which a person lives, a human being lives in the globe, it is one under authoritarian regimes, in extreme poverty, dominated by like with few enforceable rights, no access to things like a court or freedom under the law. It doesn't happen. They live in ethnically segmented worlds in which the ethnicities or sects or religions like advocate for each other. And in the West, people are like, oh, yeah, there's nothing special about Western countries. It's like, no, dude, this is a historic, like, aberration. If you looked at all human beings that lived throughout history, their lives would be impossibly bleak by Western standards. So, I think that to me is something that is easily forgotten. It's a little bit like the people who are like, like, oh, Norway, we EU countries, we don't need a military because we're not aggressive imperialists like the US. And it's like, and then one day, an actual aggressive imperialist shows up and they go, oh, this is aggressive imperialism. And the US is like, yeah, see? Like, you kept being like, oh, the US is a evil imperialist power. They're not nice guys like us Europeans. And then they're like, oh, shit. Like, the U.S. has been protecting us with their giant imperialist military. Oops. Mr. Bad Gas. Can't wait to see the end talk celebration. Vlad doing shots, Donnie doing lines. Amen to that. I want to see how they come out. I really do. I mean, so right now, there's no real evidence. They're still chit-chatting. They might chit-chat for a while. If I was Vladimir Putin, I probably would, because I like draw this out as long as possible. Because President Trump's, he seems like, so Vladimir Putin prides himself on being in excellent shape. Judo black belt, extremely fit guy, especially for a man in his early 70s, Trump being in his late 70s. But Trump has shown repeatedly that he's just not, he hasn't been Mr. Stamina, right? His press conferences are much shorter. And when he gets tired, he seems to get more like sort of loopy. He's done a lot of weird shit, like wandering around the roof or having press conferences with his tie off, kind of leaning against a pillar or something. So I think Putin believes that stamina, by stretching this as long as possible, I think that's going to play to his advantage. Putin is very good in negotiations at sort of playing people's, finding their weaknesses and exploiting them, right? Greg Stevens, thanks. People are stupid. They will believe any lie, either because they want it to be true or because they fear it to be true. That's funny. That's so true. Shout out to Terry Goodkind. Yeah, Terry Nova points out, yeah, Trump 2016 had so much more energy, and Biden in 2016 also much more energized. And yeah, I mean, like, we've all had an aging parent, man. We all know how this looks. And so, again, if you're Putin, you are going to stretch this out as long as you can. You're going to really try to wear Trump's mental state down. You're going to get him to say and do some stuff that he's not going to do. You're just going to make him make a bunch of unforced errors. That's your goal. Yeah, as Cougar Town points out, remember, Putin's a KGB agent with many decades of experience. Yeah, and Putin knows. I mean, he's a KGB agent, and then he is a 2-decade president of Russia. He is a true survivor. I mean, to be in charge of Russia from the 90s, when Russia was a criminal state, and remember, 90s Russia was effectively lawless, right? Like, the government, the Soviet Union dissolved. Like, imagine if the U.S., we can't even conceive of it, because if the U.S. government dissolved, like, our state governments are really robust, really robust by almost any standards. So we would actually have, like, well, it would be bad, but it would never be Russia in the 90s bad, because Russia in the 90s was like daily stacks of bodies appearing in the park overnight as drug dealers and gang members just went to war with each other. And so for Vladimir Putin to gather enough oligarchs together, criminals, right? People who had definitely killed people, get them all together, get them to agree, listen, we're all going to get paid if we stick together and we take over the government and we sell the government to each other. And he did it, right? I mean, this dude is a survivor, man. He is tough as nails. He is so crafty. Like, you're so stupid to try to underestimate him. And to see somebody like Trump, who really just can't seem to wheel and deal in any kind of concrete way, his deals are just so unsuccessful. It's very hard to stomach, right? It's very hard to believe this is going to go well. The longer this goes on, the worse it's going to be, right? So again, nothing happening. Yeah, he's definitely trying to wear him out. Yeah, there's like no doubt about it. So, yeah, and you know, again, I'm going to point out, I think it's relevant, this right here. This is probably everything you need to know about what's going on, right? As Putin lands in Alaska, Right, bunch of shaheads crushing Ukrainians in Donetsk. Not an accident. Again, you're talking about like completely deliberate. You know, sending a message that says, listen, I'm not going to face any consequences for this. Trump's still going to negotiate with me. I don't need to show good faith. He needs to show good faith to me. I'm in charge. I'm the boss. I'm number one. Which again, if you're a third country in the world and you're asking yourself, who do I want to be a security partner of? Do I want the United States, who's going to slap me with tariffs and then I'll negotiate a deal and then they'll slap me with tariffs again, right? Like he did to Mexico and Canada. Oh, and by the way, remember Trump renegotiated NAFTA in his first term. So like even that wasn't any good. Or are you going to say, listen, I want to at least be on the side of someone in charge. I want to be on the side of China and Russia and Iran because they are consistent, right? They backed each other up in a sincere way. It's just night and day. So, okay, I'm going to be honest with you guys. Right now, still nothing. We're still just seeing old stuff play out. We're still seeing them run old videos. Unfortunately, I've got to go. You know. So what I'm going to do is, obviously, once this gets announced, I'm going to record it as a video and drop it. I really appreciate you guys coming on board. I'm really sorry we couldn't see something actually happen. You can see this is a U.S.-Russia relations panel from like the McCain Institute from last month. So again, this is going to be a doozy. But anyway, I appreciate you guys. A couple of notes. Don't leave. Because first and foremost, in the description, you will see a link to the drone protection fundraiser. We are so close. If you want to help out the Ukrainians, and I get literally videos from them almost every day telling how much this gear helps them stay alive against Russian drones, right? We're getting them mobility gear so they can be out in the open less time. We're getting them detection gear. We're getting them netting to entangle these drones. It's absolutely essential. So again, if you can help us out, right? Thanks to guys like Klaus and Thomas, Andy, Dan, Patrick. Thanks to all you guys, right? And by the way, every dollar you donate is a dollar that gets matched by an anonymous donor. And if I'm strongly considering if we hit the $200,000 goal, I will run an ultra marathon in 2 weeks. I'm thinking about it. Won't run it fast, but I think it's just barely possible. So if you guys raise the money, I'll do it, right? The other takeaway, of course, guys, is that be sure to become members, combatvetnews.com. You guys know I've recently adopted a more transparent and honest policy about my feelings. More analysis, you guys come in for candid analysis and a statement of reality. And so far, man, I've nailed it. So, if you want to become members at Combat Vet News, that makes a huge difference. Plus, it's the only way to get access to the frontline combat footage. I try to make it worth your guys' while, dropping Tuesday and Thursday videos, plus a Q&A exclusively for members. So again, the link is in the description to all that. Please check it out. Okay. And again, I'll drop a video as soon as we learn something about what the hell these guys are discussing. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.